And we want to ask the question, what are the other scriptures of the Mormon Church? We've talked about the Book of Mormon. What else are we talking about?
Well, they have the Doctrine and Covenants, which is mainly a compilation of Joseph Smith's revelations on the governance of the setting up of the Mormon Church from 1830 through his death. And then there's a couple other revelations by other prophets, but mainly it's his revelations. Then they have the Pearl of Great Price, which is essentially two different books. One is called the Book of Moses, which is a revelation to Joseph Smith of how Moses wrote the creation story, essentially Genesis 1. And then you have the Book of Abraham, which is supposed to be a translation of some actual Egyptian papyri that Joseph Smith had bought. And when he translated it, he claimed that it contained the writings of Abraham and his story of creation.
All right, let's talk about the Book of Abraham, because you've got a whole chapter in your big book on Mormonism, Shadow or Reality. All documentation, photographs, scholars, a whole bunch of things. I want the bottom line here. Why is it, as you say, impossible in light of new evidence to escape the conclusion that the Book of Abraham is nothing more than the product of Joseph Smith's imagination? Those are strong words. Why do you say that?
Well, when Joseph Smith first did the Book of Abraham and using these papyri, no one could read Egyptian, so he could say these actual ancient texts said anything he wanted. But since then, Egyptian has been, the hieroglyphics have been translated, and we now can read Egyptian. And so for years, the Joseph Smith papyri were lost, and they didn't know where they were. They ended up being at the Metropolitan Museum in New York, which have now been returned to the Mormon Church. And so those papyri have been examined by Egyptologists, and they all agree that the papyri just represent a version of the Book of the Dead, and specifically what they call the Book of Breathings, so that the manuscripts can be translated, and there's nothing in them about Abraham. So the Mormons are more and more having to default to revelation, that he looked at the papyri and received a revelation. But the heading of the Book of Abraham itself says, a translation from some ancient records that have fallen into our hands from the catacombs of Egypt, the writings of Abraham while he was in Egypt, called the Book of Abraham, written by his own hand upon papyrus. So it makes a specific claim, not just a revelation, a translation of these documents. And in the Book of Abraham, there are 3 pictures from the papyri of Egyptian burial scenes that have to do with the Book of the Dead. And yet Joseph Smith gives a translation, supposedly, an interpretation of the pictures. Well, when you look at these, anyone that's looked at the deities of the Egyptian religion will recognize Anubis and Osiris and Isis and these different ones. And yet Joseph Smith has a completely different interpretation of what those pictures are.
Yeah, and he claimed that this was Reformed Egyptian, and a language that the scholars don't even know about.
Well, that was the Book of Mormon. Was supposed to be in Reformed Egyptian. They couldn't translate. He just said this was Egyptian papyri that he was translating because no one knew how to read it. He could claim anything he wanted and couldn't be contradicted.
And so now they have the same plates, and you do know how to translate it, and it's not about Abraham at all.
Right, right. It's just standard Egyptian text about the Book of the Dead.